While not every serial killer is a psychopath, and vice versa, there's no doubt that many have been diagnosed with that condition. We're all familiar with the most notorious of these criminals, such as Jack the Ripper and Jeffrey Dahmer. But history is filled with other serial killers that many people have never heard of, and their crimes are just as horrific, to say the least. Number 10. While many serial killers exhibit the same types of behaviors, they can't all be lumped into the same categories, since they commit crimes for different reasons, attack different types of victims, and use different modus operandi. But there is one trait that many serial killers share, and that's a need to be recognized for what they've done. Some will taunt the police until they're finally caught, while others leave calling cards in hopes that they'll become famous in the media. Others feel that they need to be caught so they're prevented from committing other crimes. One such psychopathic criminal was a doctor named Thomas Cream, who was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1950. When he was 4 years old, his family relocated to Canada, and he eventually graduated from McGill University in 1876 after studying to become a medical practitioner. He then started his practice training in London's St. Thomas Hospital, after which he relocated to Edinburgh, where he gained further qualifications that allowed him to perform surgery. He then returned to Canada, where he started his own practice. In 1886, he met a woman named Flora Elizabeth Brooks, the doctor of a hotel owner in the area. But the relationship started to sour when Flora announced that she was pregnant, an admission that nearly cost her life at Cream's hands. Her father demanded that he do the right thing and marry her, and so they tied the knot in 1876. The very next year, she lost her life to what was initially thought to be tuberculosis, though this belief would change years later. One day, a woman named Kate Gardner was found deceased in his practice near a bottle of chloroform, and while many people believed that someone, possibly Cream, had ended her life, he was never charged with any crime. He then moved to Chicago, Illinois, where he set up another practice in the city's red light district. Hence, many of his patients were street workers, and soon 2 more women lost their lives while in his care, one of whom is only known as Mrs. Stack. It's believed that Cream gave her a prescription medication that he knew would end her life, and when she was found deceased, he attempted to blackmail the pharmacist who filled the prescription, but his attempt was unsuccessful. No charges were brought against Cream, as insufficient evidence was found to implicate him, and in 1881, Alice Montgomery was found deceased, and it was determined she'd been poisoned with strychnine. She'd visited Cream's office just before she lost her life, but he wasn't investigated. He then started developing his own brand of epilepsy medication that he referred to as an elixir. Many of his patients stated that it helped them tremendously, but at one point, one of these patients, a man named Daniel Stott, asked his wife to collect his epilepsy medication from Cream, and when she took longer than expected, he became convinced she was having an affair with the doctor. Cream learned of his suspicion, and in order to avoid being confronted on the matter, he poisoned Stott's medication with strychnine, and he too lost his life. It was ruled that his epilepsy was to blame, and nothing further was done. Strangely, he then wrote to the coroner in the case and demanded that Stott's body be exhumed and checked for poisoning. It's been suggested that he was once again trying to frame the pharmacist, or that he was simply attempting to draw more attention to himself. His request was granted, and it was confirmed that Stott had been poisoned. Cream and Stott's wife were both taken into custody, but she managed to avoid jail, while he was ordered to remain behind bars for the rest of his life. But 10 years later, he was released, and he moved back to London, where he then ended the lives of 2 more women and tried to place the blame on other people as he had done before. He was charged with several murders and extortion and was eventually found guilty. He was executed, and the hangman would later reveal that Cream's last words were, "I am Jack the," though this claim was never confirmed. Number 9. The French serial killer, Joseph Vashe, isn't well known despite having ended the lives of more people than Jack the Ripper. It's believed he never became as famous merely because Jack the Ripper was never caught, while Vashe was eventually forced to face justice for his heinous crimes. He was the second youngest of 16 children, and his childhood was an unhappy one, as he was assaulted and regularly bullied. But on one occasion, he decided to fight back, and after discharging his father's firearm at a group of his bullies, he had his first run-in with the law. After a string of other incidents, he was sent away to the Harp Brothers Catholic Institute, which only lasted 2 months before he was expelled. He then started working in a restaurant while living with his sister and her husband, but he was evicted after admitting to committing several different crimes. He then relocated to Lyon, where he was placed in an asylum after he started believing that everyone was out to get him. Following this, he struggled to get by and decided to join the French military. In 1893, he started becoming obsessed with a woman named Louise Barrand, and he proposed marriage, but Louise turned him down. This enraged him, and he kept harassing her, eventually moving in with her mother to keep a close eye on her. When she confronted him over his obsession, he produced a firearm, aimed it at her face, and fired 3 times, but he was also wounded in the head. Louise somehow survived, and Vashe would suffer from paralysis on one side of his face for the rest of his life. It's believed that this resulted in him being ostracized by society, and the resulting brain damage only made his mental condition even more unstable. As a result of the attack on Louise, he was discharged from the military and sent to a psychiatric hospital. There, his bad behavior continued as he started assaulting staff members, and he managed to escape twice. He was declared insane and sent to the San Robert Hospital, but he eventually became an outpatient, which left him free to commit further crimes. He would later state that he believed God kept him from being caught, and on several occasions, innocent people were sent to prison for murders that he committed. But he was eventually arrested after attacking a woman named Marie Herod. She broke free and alerted her family, who apprehended Vashe, threw rocks at him, and locked him in a shed for 6 hours. He confessed to ending the lives of at least 11 people, but it's believed he was responsible for around 38 murders. Number 8. Leonardo Chonuli was born in Montella, Italy in 1893, and by all accounts, her childhood was an unhappy one. She would eventually marry Raphael Pansardi, a registry office clerk, in 1914, which angered her parents as they had arranged for her to marry someone else. Leonardo would later claim that because of this, her mother cursed her and her husband before they relocated to Alta Irpinia, where they had the misfortune of their house being destroyed by an earthquake. Hence, they were forced to move, and they relocated to Correggio. Here, she opened a store, and before long became well known and liked in the area. Only 4 of her 17 children lived past their infancy, and she was said to be extremely protective of them, since she believed a prophecy from a fortune teller who warned her that all of her children would pass away. While it may not have been apparent at the time, her behavior after that would be seen as worrisome today, since she believed she was responsible for keeping her son safe after he decided to join the military. She believed that she could do this from a distance through human sacrifices, and she set her sights on 3 of her neighbors, Faustina Seti, Francesca Salvi, and Virginia Cacioppo. Seti was a spinster who asked Leonardo to help her find a husband. She was told to contact a man in Pola and write letters to her friends, which were to be posted once she arrived there. On the day that she was set to leave, Seti went to Leonardo's house to say goodbye, but she was given a glass of wine that was poisoned and she lost her life. As for Francesca, Leonardo told her she'd found a job at an all-girls school. She also instructed her to write postcards to her family and then ended her life in the same way. Lastly, Virginia, who was a soprano, told Leonardo that she was looking for work. Leonardo told her that a position had opened up in Florence with a concert organizer, but she was told to keep the arrangement a secret until she reached Florence. On the day that she went to bid Leonardo farewell, she was also given poisoned wine, and she lost her life. While these 3 crimes are horrific to say the least, what she did next is even more diabolical. She claimed close to 100 lire in compensation from her victims' estates, but even more horrifically decided to use their remains to make soap, which she then gifted to her friends and neighbors. But when Virginia's sister-in-law started to become suspicious after she hadn't been in contact for some time, Leonardo's crimes were finally discovered. She told the police that she last saw Virginia walking into Leonardo's house, and when she was questioned, she immediately confessed. She was arrested, but took great pleasure in describing her crimes to investigators, revealing her psychopathic side. Number 7. It's been suggested that the Harp Brothers, Micajah and Wiley, who may actually have been first cousins, were America's first ever serial killers. They're believed to have been born between 1768 and 1770 in Orange County, North Carolina, to Scottish immigrant parents. But since their familial connection is ambiguous, historians aren't certain about this. Historians think that during their childhoods, the two started to feel persecuted by society, since their father, or fathers, may have served as Tory militants during the Regulator War, which led their family to being treated poorly by members of the community. Eventually, these tensions reached fever pitch, and the family's house was attacked, ending with their parents' lives being ended by an angry mob. The pair fled to a nearby forest, where they hid and eventually were found by a group of Chickamauga Cherokee tribesmen. They were taken in by the tribe and soon started enjoying their lifestyle. They were taught how to trap, hunt, and forage, but they also learned how to steal cattle and end the lives of their enemies. During the Revolutionary War, they joined a band of violent criminals who attacked innocent people, either assaulting and robbing them or ending their lives without a second thought. They eventually met two women, Susan and Betsy Roberts, who may have been sisters, and the group started traveling together. They made a living in Tennessee by stealing livestock and robbing travelers, but were caught while they were in the process of stealing horses. When they managed to break free and escape before being arrested, they vowed to henceforth live lives of pure violence. After ending the lives of one of their friends, they were arrested and taken to Danville for their trial, but they escaped, ended the life of another man, and then relocated to Cave in Rock in Illinois. Here, they joined a group of outlaws, but were asked to leave for being too violent. They decided to move back to Kentucky, and on the way there, they ended the lives of several more people. In 1799, Micajah was wounded in the spine after a group of men chased him down for ending the lives of several people in Henderson, Kentucky. When he finally fell, they ended his life and used his demise as a warning to other criminals. By this time, a $300 reward was being offered to anyone who managed to capture or end either brother's life. Wiley managed to escape, but 4 years later he was captured while traveling with a group of bandits. But the authorities failed to recognize him since he was using the alias of John Sutton. He managed to escape once again, and when he attempted to claim the bounty that had been placed on the gang leader, he was recognized and arrested. Quite unbelievably, he escaped again but was rearrested shortly after. He was found guilty of many crimes, which included a huge number of murders, and he was eventually executed in 1804. Following this, Susan and Betsy went on to live a quiet, normal life. Number 6. Bela Kiss was born on the 28th of July, 1877, in Austria-Hungary. When he was 23 years old, he and his wife Marie moved to Szentkoda, which in modern times is located in Budapest, where he started working as a tinsmith. After moving to his new neighborhood, he quickly became liked in the area, and his neighbors would later describe him as a pleasant man who never caused any trouble. In his spare time, he was an amateur astrologer and would eventually come to light that he had an interest in the occult. Unfortunately, the new move to a new area didn't do his marriage any favors, and Marie soon started having an affair with a man named Paul Beccari. In 1912, the pair suddenly disappeared, and Kiss told his neighbors that they decided to leave Szentkoda to start a new life elsewhere. He then hired a housekeeper, and according to her, many women would visit Kiss since he was now single. She found it strange that he'd suddenly started collecting large metal drums, and when he was questioned about this by the police, he stated he was storing gasoline since the war was about to break out in Europe, which would undoubtedly lead to a fuel shortage. They took no further notice of this since they were involved with a case in which 2 women had gone missing. Both of these women were widowed, and their families reported them as missing when they were unable to make contact with them for a few weeks. As the investigation progressed, the police learned that both women, had been seen in the company of a man named Hoffman in an area close to Budapest's Margaret Bridge. Efforts were made to track him down, but it seemed as though he was no longer in the area. 2 years later, Kiss joined the military when war finally broke out, and he was forced to leave his home along with the drums that he'd been collecting. A year and a half later, the police were told by the military that Kiss had lost his life in the line of duty, and hence would not be returning home. People in his neighborhood were shocked at hearing the news, but they carried on with their daily lives, and before long they'd started to forget about Kiss. That is, until the military started running out of fuel, and in 1916 visited Syncota in an effort to find more. One constable recalled questioning Kiss about the drums, and he quickly informed soldiers that he'd been collecting drums of gasoline that they were free to take. He showed several soldiers to Kiss's house, where they located the barrels. But they could not have been prepared for what they found. The drums didn't contain gasoline, but each one hid the remains of a woman whose life Kiss had ended. He placed them in drums with alcohol, and when his house was searched, it became clear why so many women were visiting him. He had taken out several ads in a newspaper in which he pretended to be looking for a partner, but many of these women never left his house after meeting him. But the horror didn't end there. The constable stated that he remembered several more barrels that were now missing, and when the area was searched, many more were found strewn around the countryside. When they were opened, each barrel was found to contain one of Kiss's victims, 2 of whom were the missing widows. It was suspected that Marie and Paul had their lives ended in the same way, and that Kiss managed to avoid capture since he'd lost his life. But this was not the case. Several people later reported seeing him on Margaret Bridge, and it was discovered he'd switched his ID with the man who'd lost his life during battle. He was spotted again in 1932, this time by a detective who saw him coming out of a subway station in Times Square. He was unable to pursue him though, and he was never apprehended. No one knows how many victims he had or where he eventually ended up, and that mystery will likely never be solved. Number 5. Ottilie Climac, better known to those who knew her as Tilly, was born in Poland in 1876, but her family decided to immigrate to the US while she was still a baby. In 1890, she met a man named John Mitkiewicz, and they decided to get married. They remained married for the next 24 years until 1914, when John suddenly became ill and passed away. Doctors found that he had lost his life to heart failure, but Tilly didn't mourn for too long, as she soon married a man named Joseph Rakowski. Strangely, he soon became ill too and passed away shortly after. She then started dating another man, but he ended their relationship for reasons unknown. But before long, he also lost his life. Very soon, Tilly was in another relationship with Frank Kupchak, and they were soon to get married. The couple started living in an apartment that Tilly shared with her now deceased boyfriend, and she started telling their neighbors that Frank would also soon meet his demise. When Frank got up in the morning, she would taunt him by saying it won't be long now, but he passed it off as a macabre joke. She eventually found a coffin that was on sale and had to obtain permission from her landlady to store it in the building's basement. Her prediction soon came true when Frank fell ill, and he was buried in the coffin that she'd been storing. In 1921, she married once again, this time to Joseph Climac. But on this occasion, when he became ill, doctors took notice, and it was discovered that he'd been poisoned with arsenic. Tilly was arrested, but this didn't seem to bother her too much. The decision was made to exhume the bodies of her former husbands, and it was discovered they had all been poisoned with the same substance. The soil around their graves was tested and found to be free of arsenic, proving that they had ingested the poison before they were buried. Under questioning, she revealed that she had obtained the poison from her cousin, Nellie, who knew that Tilly and Frank's marriage was on the rocks, but had suggested they get a divorce. Joseph was lucky to escape with his life, but he remained in the hospital for months before recovering. Tilly was convicted and ordered to spend the rest of her life in prison. Nellie was acquitted after a year in jail, and Tilly would eventually pass away while still incarcerated in 1936. Number 4. In modern times, the idea of medieval highwaymen and bandits has been romanticized by films and TV shows. But back in those days, they were a bane of society, and were considered to be very dangerous, since they would often stop at nothing to claim the money and possessions of others, including ending their lives. One of these criminals was a psychopath named Peter Nyers, who was born in Germany in the 16th century. His family was very poor, and he would often see the differences between his family and those of higher classes, which no doubt enraged him, and according to experts, may have been one of the reasons why he became a serial killer. In 1525, people in Germany who were struggling to get by while the rich only got richer decided to rise up against the government, and this resulted in what was known as the German Peasants' War, in which the castles, homes, and land of rich people were stormed and raided. With the crime rate at an all-time high, highwaymen saw it as the perfect time to carry out their crimes undetected. Nyers decided it was the life for him, and he gathered a gang of 24 men in France where the war was at its worst. Nyers and his men started to rob and murder indiscriminately across Europe and areas of Germany. They were very organized and would, on occasion, break up into smaller groups to target more victims, or stay together to rob groups of people who were traveling together for safety. Realizing that the authorities were helpless to capture them, they eventually started entering towns to rob anyone they could find. Soon, the gang became well known, as stories of their exploits were told all across Europe. For 11 years, the gang robbed, pillaged, and murdered without any resistance. But in 1577, one of Nyers' men decided he'd had enough of a life of crime, and he handed himself over to the police. He gave them Nyers' name, as well as those of other robbers, and they were arrested. Under bad treatment and questioning, he admitted to ending the lives of at least 75 people, including those of several women who'd been reported as missing. He was slated to be executed, but somehow managed to escape, further adding to his legend. And soon, stories about Nyers are being printed on pamphlets and books, and people started singing songs about him, in which he was depicted as a practitioner of black magic, who was able to avoid capture thanks to his supernatural abilities. It was said that he could turn into a stone or animal whenever he was being pursued, and hence always managed to evade capture. 4 years after escaping custody, he was staying at an inn when townspeople arrived and demanded his possessions be checked. This led to Nyers' true identity being discovered. He was found having a bath in the inn, and he was detained by the locals. It was later said that he was only caught because he didn't have his magical objects with him, since he was in the bath. He didn't put up a fight and surrendered to the authorities without incident. Number 3. Most serial killers carry out their crimes either because they feel they need to or for the thrill. But in the case of William Burke, profit was the foremost motive, and many people believe that had he not found a quick way of making money, he may never have ended any lives at all. Burke was born in Orrery, Ireland in 1792, but he eventually relocated to Scotland. One of his friends, William Hare, had followed the same path, and after working several different jobs, became a lodging housekeeper in Edinburgh. Burke arrived in Edinburgh in 1827, and on the 29th of October of that year, Hare asked him to come to the boarding house. When he arrived, Hare told him that a pensioner who had been staying there had passed away in the night, and this angered Hare, since the man still owed £4 in rent. He was determined to collect the money owed to him, and so he and Burke devised a plan to steal the man's body from his coffin, after which they sold it to a surgeon called Robert Knox, who paid them £7 and 10 shillings. After realizing that they could make a lot of money this way, they decided to start luring more people to the boarding house with the help of their wives, but they would never leave, as their lives were ended and their remains were sold to Knox, who was running an anatomy school. At the time, murder was rampant in the area, and the government passed what was known as the Murder Act, which ensured that anyone found guilty of this crime would be executed, and they would be denied a burial. Surgeons had started offering money to anyone who could supply them with bodies, and people started raiding graveyards to make ends meet. While this was a heinous act, no one could be arrested for the crime, since bodies weren't considered to be anyone's property, and these people became known as resurrectionists. But Burke and Hare never robbed any graves, since they found it easier to ply their victims with alcohol before ending their lives. It was later found they'd ended the lives of 16 people in this way, and had made a great deal of money in the process. As time went by, they became overconfident, and they decided to end the life of James Wilson, a man who was living on the streets, and they were nearly caught. Wilson was well known in the area thanks to his club foot, and when his body was sold to Knox, some of his students recognized him. Before long, Burke and Hare started falling out when it became apparent that Hare had been neglecting to pay his partner. Burke started taking on lodgers of his own, but one night asked him to stay at Hare's boarding house since a woman named Marjorie Docherty was arriving to stay with him for a while. His lodgers arrived back at the property to collect some of their belongings, and there they found that Marjorie had been murdered. Both men were taken into custody, and they started pointing the finger at each other. Hare turned King's witness, and thanks to his testimony, Burke was found guilty, after which he was executed and his body was donated to science. Hare walked away a free man and fled from Edinburgh and disappeared into obscurity. Number 2. Levvenia Fischer is believed to be the United States' first ever female serial killer. Her childhood is obscure to say the least, but it's known that she was born in the latter part of the 1700s, and it's thought that she grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. As an adult, she was married to a man named John Fisher, and together they ran an inn called 6 Mile Wayfarer House, which was located 6 miles outside of Charleston. The inn was a popular stop for people who were traveling through the area, since they were wary of highwaymen who were known to be operating around the city. This meant that they usually had a lot of money and expensive items with them when they arrived, and became the perfect victims for Levvenia and John to take advantage of. It's believed that once they arrived, Levvenia would welcome them and make them feel at home. If they were male, she would flirt with them to gain their trust before they were given a cup of tea that had been laced with an unknown substance. The couple waited until their guests fell asleep, after which they were carried into a room containing a trap door. They were dropped through the door into the basement, and there their lives were ended and their possessions were stolen. It's been suggested that several other people were involved in this nefarious plot, but that theory has never been proven. Before long, people in the area started growing suspicious since travelers would arrive at the inn but were never seen again. One day in 1918, a group of locals descended on the inn and confronted the people with their suspicions, but Levvenia used her natural charm to convince them that they were mistaken. But she didn't leave it there, and as soon as the mob left, she ordered that one of the men, David Ross, who decided to remain at the inn, be murdered. He somehow managed to escape while being attacked, and he immediately went to the police. When they arrived at the inn, John, Levvenia, and a few other men lay in wait with several firearms, but realizing they were outnumbered, they decided to surrender. After their arrest, the building was searched, and the police found the possessions belonging to several people who'd been reported missing. But they were unable to find any bodies, and so it was decided that the inn should be burned down. Since none of the missing people were found there, many people believed that Levvenia and John were merely robbers, not serial killers, and they were put on trial as highway robbers. They were both found guilty and sentenced to be executed, but while they were incarcerated at the old Charleston City Jail, they started appealing to several judges in an attempt to have their sentences commuted to life in prison. At one point, they hatched a plan to escape, but they never got the chance as they were both executed on the 18th of February, 1820. It's said that on the day of her execution, Levvenia told the attending governor, who'd rejected her pardon, that if he had a message for the devil, she'd be happy to deliver it since she'd be seeing him soon. Number 1. At first, Bertha Gford was seen as someone who loved caring for her friends and family, but it would later come to light that she saw this perceived caring nature as an opportunity to act out on her psychotic nature. Bertha lived in Jefferson County, Missouri, in the late 1800s, and is said to have been one of the most beautiful women in the area. In 1894, she married Henry Graham, and they seemed happy for the first decade of their marriage, until Henry started having an affair with another woman. Strangely, she didn't seem too perturbed after finding out about this, and she started dating a man named Eugene Gifford, who was 10 years younger than her. Eugene was engaged to another woman, but soon fell in love and left her to be with Bertha instead. As for Henry, he suddenly became gravely ill and before long passed away. This left Bertha and Eugene free to get married, which they did in 1907. They relocated to Franklin County as they'd grown tired of the gossip concerning their relationship. Eugene started working as a successful farmer in Big Bend, and soon Bertha became known as an excellent cook who would prepare meals for the hired hands on the farm. She was also seen as the local nurse, since she would care for anyone in the area who'd become too ill to care for themselves. But some people were too sick to be saved, and they passed away. No one ever suspected that anything nefarious was going on, since Bertha was friendly and helpful, and by all accounts wouldn't hurt a fly. But on one occasion, when two siblings passed away in a short time period while in her care, some people started to grow suspicious. One doctor, W.H. Hemker, who had attended to these patients, decided to perform autopsies on the two brothers, but he was denied permission to do so. Nevertheless, he noted that many of Bertha's patients who'd passed away suffered from the same symptoms, which were acute gastritis, and what he described as an unknown disease. As a result, people in the area started to gossip about the couple, and it was suspected they might be serial killers. Many people demanded that an investigation be undertaken, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. But when 49-year-old Ed Brinley passed away after suffering the same symptoms while being cared for by Bertha, a prosecutor finally decided that an investigation was needed. But Bertha vowed to sue anyone who testified against her, and the case was dropped due to a lack of witnesses. She and Eugene moved to St. Louis, Missouri in an effort to escape the gossip once more. But when it came to light that Bertha had purchased arsenic several times right before one of her patients perished, the case was reopened. She was arrested and put on trial for 3 of the cases, though it was believed that she was responsible for ending the lives of at least 17 people, including that of Henry, her first husband. She was found guilty by reason of insanity in November of 1928 and sent to the Farmington State Hospital. She was never tried in any of the other cases, but most historians believe she was a prolific serial killer who certainly wasn't insane and who only just managed to avoid execution. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knott, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.